Mark Twain Selected Works. Autobiographical Dictation. How to Get Any Job You Want, Part 2. March 27th, 1906. Shortly after my marriage in 1870, I received a letter from a young man in St. Louis who was possibly a distant relative of mine. I don't remember now about that. But his letter said that he was anxious and ambitious to become a journalist, and would I send him a letter of introduction to some St. Louis newspaper and make an effort to get him a place as a reporter. It was the first time I had had an opportunity to make a new trial of my great scheme. I wrote him and said I would get him a place on any newspaper in St. Louis. He could choose the one he preferred, but he must promise me to faithfully follow out the instructions which I should give him. He replied that he would follow out those instructions to the letter, and with enthusiasm. His letter was overflowing with gratitude, premature gratitude. He asked for the instructions. I sent them. I said he must not use a letter of introduction from me or from anyone else. He must go to the newspaper of his choice and say that he was idle and weary of being idle and wanted work, that he was pining for work, longing for work, that he didn't care for wages, didn't want wages, but would support himself. He wanted work, nothing but work. And not work of a particular kind, but any kind of work they would give him to do. He would sweep out the editorial rooms. He would keep the inkstands full and the mucilage bottles. He would run errands. He would make himself useful in every way he could. I suspected that my scheme would not work with everybody, that some people would scorn to labor for nothing, and would think it matter for self-contempt. Also, that many persons would think me a fool to suggest such a project. Also, that many persons would not have character enough to go into the scheme in a determined way and test it. I was interested to know what kind of a candidate this one was, but of course I had to wait some time to find out. I had told him he must never ask for wages. He must never be beguiled into making that mistake. That sooner or later an offer of wages would come from somewhere, and in that case he must go straight to his employer and give him the opportunity to offer him the like wages, in which case he must stay where he was. That as long as he was in anybody's employ, he must never ask for an advance of wages. That would always come from somewhere else if he proved his worthiness. The scheme worked again. That young fellow chose his paper, and during the first few days he did the sweeping out and other humble work and kept his mouth shut. After that, the staff began to take notice of him. They saw that they could employ him in lots of ways that saved time and effort for them at no expense. They found that he was alert and willing. They began presently to widen his usefulness. Then he ventured to risk another detail of my instructions. I had told him not to be in a hurry about it, but to make his popularity secure first. He took up that detail now. When he was on his road between office and home, and when he was out on errands, he kept his eyes open, and whenever he saw anything that could be useful in the local columns, he wrote it out, then went over it and abolished adjectives, went over it again and extinguished other surplusages, and finally, when he got it boiled down to the plain facts, with the ruffles and other embroideries all gone, he laid it on the city editor's desk. He scored several successes and saw his stuff go into the paper unpruned. Presently, the city editor, when short of help, sent him out on an assignment. He did his best with it, and with good results. This happened with more and more frequency. It brought him into contact with all the reporters of all the newspapers. He made friends with them, and presently one of them told him of a berth that was vacant, and that he could get it, and the wages too. He said he must see his own employers first about it. In strict accordance with my instructions, he carried the offer to his own employers, and the thing happened which was to be expected. They said they could pay that wage as well as any other newspaper. Stay where he was. This young man wrote me 2 or 3 times a year, and he always had something freshly encouraging to report about my scheme. Now and then he would be offered a raise by another newspaper. He carried the news to his own paper. His own paper stood the raise every time, and he remained there. Finally, he got an offer which his employers could not meet, and then they parted. This offer was a salary of $3,000 a year, to be managing editor on a daily in a southern city of considerable importance, and it was a large wage for that day and region. He held that post 3 years. After that, I never heard of him any more.